Hello there, and welcome to Delightful Dissent. Today it's episode 15, and I'm going to be talking to Adrian Ashton. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Hello.
It's really good to have you on. If you're watching the show live, sorry for the slight delay. Had some slight technical issues, but that's what being live is all about, isn't it? So today we're going to be talking about the assumption we damage trust when we challenge others' actions. And this is a really, really interesting one for me. I've often found myself holding myself back in all sorts of situations when it really doesn't feel supportive, when it doesn't feel okay to speak out, but actually when I really want to help someone and really want them to be able to, to help them out and actually make the best of things. So it's definitely something I've struggled with in the past. So hopefully this will be a really interesting one to get into stuff, and I think we're going to get into all sorts of stuff around power and how we do this, and really interesting conversations. So if you're new to the show, you haven't watched Delightful Dissent before, or you've only caught a couple of episodes, it's a show about challenging the deep assumptions, challenging the stuff that really holds us back, possibly without us even knowing, that hidden stuff that trips us up. It's also a chance to give you some ideas about how you can go out and challenge the assumptions that are holding you back and that are holding other people back as well. So it's not just about us, like as experts, whatever that means. It's about everyone being able to do this and giving you some help to some ideas about how you might do this yourself. And the show's called Delightful Dissent because, we are challenging stuff. We're saying, okay, this isn't the way we think things are. There's something wrong here, but we're doing it in a way that's positive and doing it in a way that hopefully results in making things better for everyone. So it's actually about...
Sorry, Matthew, I thought it was called Delightful Dissent, because we're British. And therefore, to bring anarchy, we have to be polite in how we do it. So we're being polite anarchists.
Polite anarchists, yeah, I like that. Yeah,
YouTube wouldn't let you have that title, so you had to.
I really like that. That's a great idea. That does pretty much sum up the kind of making some polite anarchy. Definitely. No, that's great. The show is genuinely live, as the technical issues that delayed us at the beginning maybe go improve. So stuff may go wrong, so please do bear with us. Also, we might be talking about difficult topics and challenging stuff, so be aware that if we might be going into something that you find difficult, so just know that may happen, and we might use strong language. So also just be warned, if that's something that bothers you, then I'll hopefully put some warnings on the recorded stuff, but if you're watching live, can't promise that we won't use strong language. So this is really about engaging with the messy areas and engaging in general, engaging with the gray areas and the difficult stuff. And if you're watching, or, at any point when you're watching or listening to this, please do engage with it. Think about it, ask questions about yourself, and ask us questions. We don't have all the answers. That's not what this show is about. It's about not having the answers, really. So get out there and ask questions, engage. If you're watching live, ask questions on YouTube, and we'll be able to see them and respond to them. If afterwards, I'll be sharing stuff how you can get in touch with either of us if you want to ask questions or have more of a conversation later on. So so today's guest is Adrian Ashton, and I really did. We met, first of all, through the Good Business Club at a Good Business Club event. And I was really kind of struck by the fact that Adrian's doing some really quite radical, out there stuff, but with big corporates, big organizations. And that definitely caught my interest, because it's often you can have one or the other, but not both. So I really wanted to get him on today to talk about kind of more of the stuff that he's doing. So as I say that, Adrian, could you tell us a little bit about what you do and the kind of people that you like to work with?
Okay, so I'm not proud. If the money's there, I'll do it. No, there's actually a line somewhere. I have turned money down before when I've been offered it for certain contracts. So I find myself getting involved in all sorts of odd things, Matthew, some of which, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to talk about because of legal orders, which is a shame, because that's where the really good learning is. That's where you get the best stories, as warning, as encouragement. But when all this is over and we can meet back together again, then buy me a tipple of my favorite in a bar somewhere, and I may accidentally leak something. So with that in mind, what I can talk about is I work with all sorts of people and all sorts of groups. That ranges from someone who says, I think I've got half an idea about maybe setting up a market stall as a way just to try and earn a bit of money, through to small businesses, local shops, through to charities, cooperatives, social enterprises, through to regional businesses, like say some national companies, government bodies, business support programs, universities and enterprise education programs in it, all seems to hang under the banner of enterprise support and development. But not enterprise as Neil Tennant wrote, in terms of let's make lots of money. Enterprise as in what if, why not? Enterprise as a mechanism to say, let's challenge the way we do things. Why can't we change something? Why can't we introduce a new process? Why can't we do that way? What's the way that would make it work? So that's the spectrum of people and groups I work with. And the stuff that involves is everything from what I would call beer mentoring. So we go down the pub, you pay me in beer. After about the third pint, it gets a bit ropey, but up to then, people say it's pretty good. Like I say, up to doing bits with universities, institutions, policy bodies, accidentally changing company law in one of those processes, which was fun, and all sorts of issues. So governance, finance, change management, values, impact, because my head's not wired right. In my head, all this stuff's connected. The way that you approach how you finance your project or your enterprise is equally ingrained in how you are managing it and your values. You can't separate them. So to me, all these things are connected, and that's a long rambling way. But if you ask anyone who's known me or heard about me, you will probably get a slightly different story as to what it is I do, because I do this kind of whatever people need.
That's great, and I think it's a story that's been repeated, and I very much resonate with as well. You know, that you're kind of doing what's needed, and also the connecty thing, and seeing connections, seeing an endless web of connections, which can make things tricky as well.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, working in the web, as it were. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So before we actually get stuck into the assumption, I always like to ask my guests to bring in a quote to kind of help get a bit of support before we go full on into arguing with the way that things are done. So yeah, have you got something you could share with us?
Yes. So ordinarily, Matthew, when I come and ask for a favorite, I'm not really kind of one of these ones who reads all the inspirational speeches and things. And normally, if people say, what's your favorite quote? It's one that's attributed to Oscar Wilde, which is try everything once apart from incest and Morris dancing. But I thought that maybe wasn't quite in the right feel for this afternoon's or today's call. So I've actually got one that I came across years ago, and it's something I actually printed off and I got framed on my office wall. It's by a person called if Ramus, if you're listening, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. It's Ramus Ankerson. Ramus Ankerson once said, if it isn't broken, consider breaking it. Don't be complacent. And I just like the idea of saying constantly challenge, constantly question. Just because it's accepted wisdom doesn't mean it's right anymore, which is why when Matthew, you kind of invited me to join me this afternoon, it just seemed a really good fit in terms of the sorts of things that get me excited, and the spaces I like to play in.
Absolutely. No, I really like that quote. I think it's I've in my whole career come up against, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's an excuse for same old, and it ends up with diminishing returns. So often it's like, and by the time you realize you're in diminishing returns, it's kind of too late. It's like, oh, we wish we changed it all that time. Oh yeah, but we didn't because it wasn't broken then, but now it is. So yeah, no, I think challenging the way that things are done, what people are doing is absolutely core to that. No, so brilliant, thank you. Yeah. So the assumption we're actually going for today is, we damage trust when we challenge others' actions. Could you tell me a little bit about, what that means to you? Why you wanted to talk about it today?
Okay, it strikes me, Matthew. I mean, it's always difficult when we're recording these sorts of interviews, and we know they're going to be available afterwards, that anything we share doesn't date too quickly. And here today, this afternoon, 25th of February 2021, the world is still in the middle of a pandemic, which, comes around every century or so. Things are changing again quite quickly, and we are all facing uncertain futures. Whatever we say, we are kind of going, we hope this, maybe that, but actually we're all kind of feeling our way. The future outcomes of our plans are uncertain. They're uncertain at the best of times, but at the moment, it's just massive. We've got no idea if this is anything we're doing is going to work or not. And that means, in order to keep going, we rely on trust even more. When outcomes are uncertain, we cling to that knowledge, that trust, that faith we have in each other. At least that relationship's going well. At least I've got this. And we kind of cling to that, to kind of go, this is really important. So trust is a really valuable commodity in whatever part of the world and life that we live and walk. And at the moment, even more so. And aligned with that, if you look up, this is an interesting conversation I always have with people. So we're recording this, we're both in Britain, we're both British. What are your country's values? And one of the values of British culture is tolerance. And tolerance kind of says, well, if you're tolerant, it means you can trust people, you can get on better. So there's something about our identity in terms of is bound up with trust and challenge. The way that we move forward into this world is bound up with trust and challenge. But we have this kind of interesting spark, and it's kind of, it roams around in the back of our head that we all see things all the time. We have experiences that we go, oh, if only someone would speak out. That really bugs me. That's kind of upsetting me. It's knocking me off my game. It means I can't do what I want to do. It's upsetting, it's frustrating, it's limiting me because of my response to it. And it's maybe not just me, it's I can see other things as well. And that kind of crystallized, and you and I were chatting briefly before we came live this afternoon. And we were both reminiscing about a call that we were both in recently as well, where we both signed up to the same webinar, unbeknownst to each other. It's kind of one of those happy coincidences. And we both sat there going through it. And unbeknownst to us, we both were thinking the same thing, which is the person leading it was kind of treating us like children. And we weren't getting anything valuable out of it. But yet from our side of the cameras, we thought, well, everyone else seems to be doing great. So we didn't speak out. We didn't challenge it. We just thought, let's have it rolling on. And then afterwards, we were chatting. We realized that we have both had the same feeling. And we both thought, dang it, we should have said something. We should have challenged that person for the risk of being unpopular, for the risk of maybe dinting that relationship, for the benefit of everyone. So rather than just benefit a few people, we need to benefit everyone. We need to bring a challenge in some way. And that kind of links back to this kind of other constant idea we have as well about how we live our lives, which is what's more important? Is it more important that we as an individual have our rights respected and upheld and we can act in the way that we want? Or is it more important that the society we are part of is able to get along as well? And that for the benefit of everyone, and it's trying to get that tension between it.
Yeah. No, it's for me. It's a, it's a deceptively connected question. It's like it's so much around context and how the way that we do things, and all of the stuff around that, as well as being about exactly what it is that you do. And yeah, I think I've spent a lot of time in organizations not speaking up, not challenging, and sometimes when I have, it's gone very badly as well. And that's partly down to my own competence and partly down to the fact that some organizations it's genuinely just not safe to do. And I think one of the questions, so that there's probably two kind of practical questions I'd like to kind of explore today as we explore the ideas as well, is how do I do it? How do I speak up? But also, how do I create a situation where it's okay to speak up to me? It's okay to challenge me. It's okay to, because that's the other side of it, and I think that's also a really big challenge, particularly for those of us with, when we find ourselves in positions of authority. And that's even, I say positions of authority, I don't necessarily mean being a senior person in a large organization, though that might be the case. We kind of have authority just by talking on this show. we're standing up and we're saying something and we say it very clearly and we've got these backgrounds, and it's like, but how do we have that conversation in a way that is open to challenge? Is kind of, I think there's some really, really interesting stuff in there.
And maybe that, in terms of being open ourselves, is actually about how we feel, we value ourselves and we feel confident. If, for example, if I don't feel confident in myself, if I don't feel I have enough grounding or evidence or things I can pull up to go, this explains why I've taken this position, then I don't feel confident speaking out. I don't feel confident in people coming to me to challenge it, because I'm going to be exposed as a fraud, which links into other conversations for other times about self-worth, how we perceive ourselves, imposter syndrome, such like that. And it's right, the cues that we have to bring that are interesting. So you mentioned some of our backgrounds. You obviously are much more widely read than I am in terms of your bookcases behind you. If you kind of look closely in the screen or you zoom in, you'll kind of see a lot of my influences are slightly less paper-based in that regard. I do have lots of books, just to reassure you. I've read voraciously as a kid. What do we base our positions on? How do we feel comfortable being challenged ourselves? Because if we're like I say, if we're not open to be challenged, how can we challenge others if we cannot be challenged ourselves? There's no authority in that. There's no credibility in it, and we lose the argument before we begin.
What comes up for me in that there's kind of two sides of this, and I think this is a really interesting one, because and that this actually works both being challenged and challenging. Is sometimes there's a challenge of like the challenge is, okay, I don't understand this, I just don't get it, there's something I'm missing here. Sometimes the challenge is, I think I get this, but I have evidence to the contrary. Well, this is wrong, to put it in blunter terms, and I think they're quite different. The experience is different. I'm increasingly comfortable standing up and saying, okay, sorry, I've missed something, I'm not sure I get it. What I'm interested in is actually that second kind of challenge as well, and then like, how do we say, well, actually no, and this plays into the tolerance thing, I think, as well. It's different to say, okay, I don't know, but that feels it's increasingly easy. It used to be completely impossible in a professional context. Now it's easier. In most places, it's relatively safe to say, I don't have complete knowledge.
We get our phones out and someone, whoever we're speaking with in a group, goes, actually, I've just Googled that, I've Wikipedia'd it, it's actually this. Yeah,
that's easier now. But the second one of saying, well, no, actually, this isn't, I don't see it that way. I have evidence, I have it's not just that I don't know, it's that I know different. And that feels like a different thing again.
And I think that's, our lived experience. And that feeds into our prejudice and our bias, which says, so for example, both of us, Matthew, are paperweights, because you've read different books to me. We've watched slightly different movies. What you want out of this life is probably slightly different to what I want out of this life. And that informs the way that we approach all situations, all scenarios, and how comfortable and confident we are for calling things out and to present ourselves as a target to say to people, pull me down, take a strip off me because I'm challenging you, but in return, you might push back. And if I'm not prepared for you to push back at me, and if I'm not prepared to think, how do I defend that position? How do I recover from it if it turns out you're right and I'm wrong, without losing my position of perceived authority in the relationship, if I'm a manager or something else? We don't even begin it, and it falls apart.
I think that protecting authority is a very interesting theme in this, and the relationship to, how we challenge and power, and it's something I'm very aware of, particularly in terms of challenging other people when I want to support them as well. This has always been one of the questions for me, is even if I don't have kind of like hard authority, official authority, there is just a privilege that comes with being a white male middle-class man that means that I have this kind of social capital, this power that I don't want to use to just drown out other voices. And so that's actually, for me, I think for me that's part of the reticence to challenge, is partly that I don't want to kind of misuse the power that I do have.
Yeah, well, so we don't know. There's the phrase of keeping your powder dry. Wait for the best moment to use your opportunity, because if you otherwise you're the boy who cried wolf. You keep calling it out, you become known as the troublemaker. There are some parts of some sectors, and that is my reputation. Here's Adrian, he's the troublemaker, because I challenge. I don't challenge. Now the interesting thing is I have that reputation not because I challenge individuals within that sector, and I don't call them out on it. I challenge the assumptions that lead to their behaviors in that sector, and I root it in evidence and research. But I will always say at the start, but I haven't read everything. I haven't had all the conversations that you've had. This is, like I said, it's framing it and almost kind of diffusing it and saying to people, this is your get out clause to say you don't have to believe me. If you want to engage with this, here are the rules of engagement. But if you just want to be polite, be extra British, smile and wave, that's fine. You can simply go, okay, well, that's fine. That's your understanding. This is mine. We can move on. And it's that idea of how I think part of the extent to which we challenge is also depends on how invested we are in the outcome of that behavior, of the other person's behavior or attitude or understanding. How far does it affect us? Depends on how far we challenge it. And that raises all sorts of questions about exploding this into philosophical terms about micro and macro ethics. Typified a lot over this last year about the debates about face coverings and such like. But that's, again, I keep kind of saying that's another conversation coming up in the series, folks. Subscribe to the channel, catch them up that way.
Yeah, one of the challenges with this is we can diverge somewhat, if you like. We can kind of explore some of the space, definitely, but it is really connected, and I think that's actually one of the big challenges with this is that stuff is always happening in context. And when we have these we make these statements or say, or take these actions that are a bit disconnected from context. They might have worked in the past, or they might work in a different set of circumstances, but they're not the right approach now. They're not a helpful approach now. That's actually one of the really difficult things, because it's, for me, I think I've often encountered that, so we did this before and it worked. We did this before and it didn't work. It's like, on its own, that statement doesn't actually say very much. Yeah, it's like, okay, great. Well, it doesn't pertain to the current situation unless the current situation is like what happened before.
Well, I think it's a really important visual cue about where that person roots their thinking. And it kind of says, my experience, how I approach the conversation, the thought process, the decision practice is rooted in my lived experience, not in any external objective referencing. And that, again, sometimes when we're touching upon some of the practicalities of how we bring challenge, it's how we look for those cues which say, what are they really saying? What are they revealing about themselves and how they say that? And then, the follow-up question is, okay, you tried it before. Well, what external factors were going around then that are still current today? Because if they're the same factors, then absolutely, you're right, we shouldn't try it. And that makes it safe. And we kind of take the personalization. I think part of the difficulty we have in terms of thinking about challenge and how we bring it is people feel it's personal, because we don't know how to have good, constructive, critical conversations with each other. It feels personal. You're having a go at me because I don't like it. No, I'm not having a go at you. I'm simply technical problems. I'm simply having, you can tell it's live, folks. I'm simply suggesting my understanding is different to yours. And that means that we should approach things differently.
It's one of the things, I think I've certainly encountered there's kind of underlying related assumption that we should all kind of believe the same thing and think the same thing. And that's the only way to get a harmonious situation. And it's, yeah.
And again, it's the idea of things change over time. As a society, let's kind of take this from a historical, social perspective. As a society, and some people still say this, Britain is a Christian nation. As a society, the behavioural norms were, you all went to church on Sunday, you had your christening gown and so when that was it. Every household had a family Bible. that was it. That's changed a lot because as time has gone on, as a society, as a collective, we've started to say, well, let's start to ask more questions. We've got comfortable asking questions. We've got comfortable saying, it's okay not to have a Bible in the house. It's okay not to go to church. It's okay to believe something else. But we haven't quite done it in a way that allows us to say, but how do we then do that in a way which doesn't diminish the others? We've been tolerant of them. It goes back to the idea of British values. We tolerate other people's religious beliefs and views because that's their domain. If this is a postmodern society, your truth is equally as important as mine. That's fine. But that postmodernism has started to push a bit far because now we say, actually, my beliefs are more important than yours. We've gone beyond tolerance. And we started to say, actually, I don't believe in your religion. That means your religion's wrong because I don't believe in it. So, hang on a minute. How does that work if we're trying to get along together? We can hold different views. So as a quick straw poll, dear viewers, we haven't practiced this on live yet. Great question, Matthew. Marmite, yes or no?
Yes.
Sorry. I'm obviously of the other camp. Okay.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't stop us being able to have a good, robust conversation together. It doesn't stop us being able to call each other out and to prod and poke things. It's simply a reflection of what I suggest are our factory default settings in terms of our preferences for, doing it that way. It's useful to know these things. So in certain situations, it imposes how it goes. So, for example, knowing that, I would never suggest we do a business breakfast together.
Yeah.
Any other time, any other movement, absolutely fine. But it helps us understand and frame that relationship and frame that challenge as well in terms of understanding and digging into it. So that idea of, a kind of a universalism, we're all one mind, we're all one heart. What a boring world that will be. We need divergence. We need to be, Star Trek, for example. I did Facebook Lives a while ago. I kind of always end it off with the kind of the wish for it. This is not live long and prosper. Okay, I always offer it with the Vulcan sort of mirror image, which is peace and long life. Okay, I think it's much more encompassing that way. But the Vulcans in Star Trek were brilliant because they had this thing called IDIC, IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. The universe is and should be a glorious mishmash. We should all have different ideas. We should all have different preferences. The difficulty, and the Vulcan said we use logic to bind it all together in Star Trek, which you can take your own view on. But it's the idea of we need to find a way. We need to find ways to have these conversations with each other, to challenge each other, where we say, actually, your view is causing you to act in a way in terms of your behaviors, your actions, which are actually, I think, not helpful for me, or is it not helpful for us as a wider society? And then that approach is how we bring it. The trust element is there because we still have to live with each other as neighbors, as work colleagues, as family members. So how do we kind of maintain the basis of that relationship when it can be awkward conversations?
And I think there's a part of the trust element for me, actually, and in this assumption, is that there's also an implicit assumption that we don't damage trust if we don't challenge, and that is equally problematic. I think over time, and this is actually the local versus global, but on a timescale thing. I think that you might increase the local trust, but at the significant cost of the kind of the long-term trust of that I can, because I, particularly as if I have an authority position, I want to be challenged. I want people to tell me when I'm wrong, because that stops me from doing stupid things. And I would do many stupid things if I was allowed without,
And how do we hope to grow as a person if we aren't challenged, if we don't understand where we're getting it wrong, if we aren't thinking about how we work it? And again, that kind of tips upon one of your previous conversations you had with Margaret Barry in episode 5, I believe it was. One of the reasons we should question, she said we question, I said challenge, both as a challenger and a challengee, is to help us both grow as people. That we don't stagnate, that we don't just become frogs at the bottom of a pond. We're just kind of going, well, they're just boring. Who wants to be a boring frog? Well, actually, if you're looking for your princess, looking for your prince to kind of come and change your life, then maybe you are on the lookout for a boring frog. And if that's you, then I'm sorry for upsetting you.
Yeah, I think that for me that the reward of actually discovering stuff, finding stuff out, that I'm hugely, driven by that, and I hugely value that. I know not everyone is as driven by it, but it does have practical outcomes as well, and I think that's part of it.
But then again, to counter it though, to play devil's advocate with myself on this, if we don't challenge it, if we are tolerant, one of the other arguments then is, well, the more tolerant we are, the more resilient we can become. We can learn to live with that frustration. We become resilient to shock. We develop these strategies, these coping mechanisms that allow us to get through an increasingly messy and uncomfortable world. So maybe actually by not challenging, it serves our purpose better because it helps us become more resilient.
I think resilience is a really interesting one, because for me it's a word I've explored a lot, and there's resilience, which is there's a resilience which comes from basically being able to carry on and do what you were doing before, regardless of the fact that circumstances have changed. And then there's a resilience that comes from adapting. Because and you need them both. You need flexibility, which is both some structure and some ability to move. Otherwise, because the other approach, the not changing, the kind of tolerance, which becomes appeasement, is brittle. Because if you don't respond to the thing at all, it just pushes and changes, and eventually that will get to the point where its effect is too much for you to cope with. And
we either completely snap, or our identity is subsumed, and we
it makes you more brittle,
lost as a person.
And that's a problem too. So it's like so there's, and that for me is and there's also an opportunity cost to that. It's like the context has changed. I'm still doing what I'm doing. Are there things in the context I could be doing that in the new context that could be more interesting, could be more rewarding, could be better? And we miss out on those, as well as exposing ourselves to that risk of kind of more brittleness.
I think this is where we kind of, conversations like this are really useful. And in terms of for you as the audience listening in on this, because it raises more questions and it introduces perspectives on it, which are to do with our understanding of our own psychology, the way that we think about things, our cognitive processes. The Marmite example, my line is different to your line. I've developed resilience. I've been made homeless. My family have been made homeless twice by floods. We had to build resilience, as in just we had to learn to cope with it. That was it. And our adaptation became, we adapted in the short term because there's always the hope we'd come back. But again, how we had to build and retain trust. So in terms of our builder that we had both times to help us rebuild the home to get back in, we had to have massive trust in that they knew what they were doing, that they could keep on top of it. And that was difficult because we kind of also said that they could experiment with some new techniques, not all of which went to plan. But those are other stories, which involve police at 2 o'clock in the morning and other things. Anyway, lots of kind of dramatic stuff. But there was still trust in the relationship because we found a way to challenge that, to say, look, we took out the personal. And we said, how do you, and for the builder, for our builder as well, that she was increasingly, I reckon as well, that it's that understanding and emotional intelligence, trying to say the other person, the other party in this is in a place where they're also upset, they're under stress, they're under pressure. So in terms of the trust in the relationship and how open they would be to being challenged, we have to, again, pick our moments to how we make it work. So it almost became a symbiotic relationship. So how we challenged each other to think about, well, maybe this one, maybe that, and you said this, and now we think that. And it was kind of working it up in tandem. And I think having the trust allowed us to challenge, and through the challenging, we built trust. So it's the kind of like one of those weird paradox things. But we both came to it in the same way, because at the start we sat down and said, look, this is not going to be a typical experience for us. How to make it work? But again, that though Matthew then starts to pick on this other dimension to it, we're kind of talking about trust and relationships on the implicit assumption that it's one-to-one. It's my relationship with you that one of us is calling the other out on. What if it's my relationship with my whole team? What if it's my relationship with my family? What if it's my relationship with my neighbors? What if it's my relationship with the state? I need to challenge it. I need to call it out. But yet we still have to, and all those different things, we have to maintain a relationship. There has to be trust with. The state trusts me not to act illegally. It trusts that I will pay my taxes. It trusts that I will try and look after myself and my health so that I don't end up needing to kind of go to A&E unnecessarily. There's a trust in that relationship. But in return, there are things that it's doing that I'm thinking, but in order for me to do that and act in that way, which is in your benefit, and I understand that because you've been open, I need to feel I can trust you in return. It has to be a reciprocal thing. And then it's how do we find ways to challenge that constructively in a way that I feel I've got it off my chest, I've got it out there, it's not eating me up. I've been able to then, that resilience aspect, because I've been able to bring the challenge, whether it goes anywhere or it's resolved, that allows me to work with whatever the situation is and adapt to it better than simply entrenching more and more and more and then snapping.
Yeah, and I think that openness, that move towards openness is a really big step on quite a practical level, actually, particularly in organizations and for businesses. We operate on a very closed system very often, but particularly professionals. I think we've coming from an environment where there was a kind of secret knowledge of whatever it was that we did. It was this kind of closed thing, and it's a bit like priests talking about something different behind closed doors as they talk with their congregation, or doctors talking differently with themselves to their patients, or lawyers and chambers talking differently to how they talk with their clients. And there's that's related to a lot of stuff around power and knowledge. But one of the flattening things about the internet and knowledge and the amount of knowledge that we have is that there's much less value in kind of hoarding knowledge now. It's always there, and someone's going to find it. Someone else knows it anyway. Someone's probably going to share it. But being able to open that up and being able to open up what I know gets me another advantage, which is that I can improve that. I can get you to say, well, yeah, in that case that works, but in this case, there's this instead. Yeah.
And it's idea. There's the cartoon about it has dots on a screen, which says the dots of the knowledge, the dots of the information, the lines that connect them are the knowledge that we connect, but the wisdom about how we apply it, how we grow with it, that's the circles, that's the patterns that we stargazing at night. Anyone can go, well, that's the start, great. And now this thing of going, well, and then you have to really use your imagination to go, how does those three stars look like a bear? I can't see it, but some people can, and that gives us, that unlocks that next level because they share that back with us. They, through their passion for it, they challenge us to rethink about how we've looked at something. I think how we missed something. We've both had the same information, but we both looked at it differently. We've both come at it and is trying to challenge that thing of saying, and if you can't see it, that's fine. A bit back in the 1980s, there was the kind of the big craze of the 3D pictures. Again, kind of everyone go, oh, it's the Statue of Liberty, it's brilliant. And I'd stare at them for days and go like cross-eyed by the end and go, and it just, I could never see them. This whole thing, you hold it closer, then you move it further away. No, never worked.
I can't see them in either. I do wonder whether everyone's just making them up.
But it's idea. But again, and that then makes us go, but that's challenging me about, am I missing out on something? Everyone else can see it. There's that peer affiliation, and that again, that peer framework frames a challenge more objective. So this is not about my mate saying I'm stupid. This is about me feeling I'm missing out. So the challenge then is about, it's the FOMO, fear of missing out. The challenge is actually you're being encouraged to revisit an idea, an assumption, a behavior, an understanding about yourself that may be limiting you. And therefore you're limiting, you're constraining your potential. You're not growing in the person you could be.
I think one of the amazing things about humans is our capacity for getting on socially. How much we can, how many, how we kind of want to create social harmony, and we want to create and connect with people and link with people. There's one evolutionary biologist who describes humans as an aggressively social species, and I really like that as a characterization.
Well, I think, and that's no more so than when we go back down the pubs.
Exactly. And but like, so and the example they use is we're so aggressively social, we domesticated dogs from wolves. We looked around in our environment and we looked and we saw an apex predator that ate us, and we were like, I could probably make friends with that.
It'll be fine. Yeah. What's the worst that can happen?
Exactly. But we have these traits and they're really, really deep. And there's a really fascinating psychology study, I think it's from the 60s, where basically there's just one participant and the whole rest of the room is full of stooges, actors, and they'll be asked a question by the examiner, and then they'll point out the obvious. But after a while, everyone else in the room will say, no, black is white. There's something completely different here. And more often than not, the participant will go along with that. And you can see the dissonance, the strain, but ultimately we're so kind of expected to, we have these instincts towards that kind of harmony that we question ourselves. And for me, I think as a practical thing, it's like, it's actually listening to that dissonance and being like, well, am I wrong? Is there something different? Or am I really seeing something different here? And that it's valid, because if everyone else is saying something probabilistically, there's a good chance that we are, that we've missed something. But that doesn't mean we have definitely. And how we explore into that and how we edge into that, I think, is
and the difference, if we then accept that peer norm, we've then given away our authority and our power to someone else. We've said, you know better than me. And that's the difficulty in terms of challenge. Where do we get to that point of saying, yes, you know better than me, so I'll go along with it. Even when everyone else is saying that, black is white and white is black. Or if we're the lone wolf voice going, actually, you know what, I've read up on this and I've had some conversations and I've thought about this, and everyone is saying it's fine, and yet I'm not convinced it is. And there's a story, because there's community interest companies are a legal form that government introduced almost a couple of decades ago now for social enterprises. When they first came out, again, my brain not being wired properly, I read the legislation. I thought there's something in the governance, how this legal model works, that doesn't quite chime with the values of the businesses that they're supposed to be wrapped around. And any group that adopts this legal form is being forced. It's forcing its governance to act in a way which is not reflective of those core values. And that's surely not right. And no one's talking about it, because everyone's saying how great it is, because government's done this great thing for us. And so, that black and white moment was every sort of sector body that I spoke with said, oh, no, it's fine. It's something of nothing. It's fine. It's not an issue. Don't leave it alone. You don't talk about it. And yet it kept niggling at me. And eventually I got to my going, okay, you know what? I'm going to challenge it. I have to challenge this. And it's going to make me unpopular, because essentially I'm saying, almost like being an Old Testament prophet, going at a lone voice in the wilderness, kind of going, everyone else says the king's right, the emperor's new clothes thing. Everyone else says it's all fine, and you think it's not, and you're going to kick up a stink. Well, who are you to do that? Well, you have no authority. But again, I kind of can drafted up a short kind of think piece, short article piece. So look, I'm not saying that the legal form shouldn't exist. I'm not saying everyone who's adopting it are stupid. What I'm suggesting is there's this bit of it that's not quite fitting with this bit of the sector over here. And this is the reasons why. Here's my workings out. Here's the evidence. Here's the workings out. And the regulator nobody wanted to know. So I thought, okay, went back to one of my previous lives working in corporate public relations. So this is about secondary legislation in company law. Okay, not the most, I sexed it up a bit, like you do. And then I kind of sent it to some people I knew who were editors of media publications in that sector. And they went, this is great. We're going to run this because this sounds brilliant, the way you kind of told the story. And that then opened up the conversation. Suddenly the regulator wanted to talk. And the regulator said, actually, we think you've got a point. Because now it's been presented to us in this way. Now we have this understanding that you've laid it out. We're going to, and I'm sure that it can't just be me. I have no formal legal training or qualifications, but I can't find anything else that suggests they had anyone else feeding into it, because the consultation was pretty much word for word what I'd written. But it raises that story about saying, how far do we say, when everyone else says this is fine, leave it alone, do we go, actually, no, I've got to do something, and it's going to be risky, and it's a challenge to either, and it's going to affect individual relationships. So all those sector bodies that I work alongside, those groups that I worked with, that challenge was essentially saying to them, no, I think you're all stupid. You should have seen this sooner. But I tried to frame it in a way that protected the personal relationship and said, this is about the transactional nature of what we're doing. This is why it's damaging. And then you can take it or leave on that basis. And if you want to engage, great. If you don't, I've done enough. I've brought the challenge. I've laid it out. I've showed the workings out. It's up to you now. And I'm not going to keep fighting this. And I think that's the key thing. We say, if we're going to challenge someone, we have to win. We've got this mentality. We have to win the battle because that's how it's presented. You can both win. It's not about changing someone else or fixing someone or getting someone to stop doing something. It's about saying, building that understanding on both sides. Actually, there may be good reason that their behavior or their actions are as they are. And through that constructive challenge, we better understand it. We've grown as a person, they've grown as a person, and we've come up with a new sort of thesis, antithesis, a new synthesis. We've come up with a new model of working that the challenge has given us that wouldn't have been there before.
Absolutely. I think there's something really powerful in that around the stories that we tell and the narrative, and how we're constructing something, and that actually for me a lot of the challenge is just is like telling my story well, explaining my position well in context. Then as long as that and as long as that's landed, I don't really mind what someone else is kind of, what someone else does with it. But not very many people necessarily operate in that way. And I think when you come at something from a different perspective, and that can be the officially naive perspective, because whenever you train in anything, you kind of get all these mental models, and it makes you think in a certain way. You're predisposed to think in a certain way. So most lawyers look at stuff in a common way, a relatively common way. That's in many ways, that's a good thing, but you need that outsider perspective. You need some of that outsider view to catch the blind spots. And
like I said, because the danger is we've always done it this way. So why should we change it?
And the trouble with is that very often these things are common sense, and common sense means the norms of the normal for whatever normal means in the context, and they can be very helpful. That can be very helpful. But if it isn't common sense, if there's something outside of that norm that really needs pointing out, it's not going to happen from within there. And I think that's one of the really big things. And I also think there's understanding that we, as an individual, we are kind of both within and without at the same time. Very often, that idea. And I've recently been playing with this idea of what it is to be a radical insider, to be saying, well, okay, I'm in this system, but I don't like how it works. I'm part of it, and I don't like how it works. It's a different thing to being a kind of rebel and being on the outside, but we're often treated that way. And I think that's how we negotiate that is a really big challenge.
And I think and that kind of raises an interesting dimension in terms of the constraints to challenge that we're under, that we don't realize. So, I kind of alluded about, seeing myself as an Old Testament prophet. I've written about this on my blog before. I think freelancers like me, I'm not employed by anyone. I can speak out. I can bring a lot more challenge, a lot more easily about systems, processes, people. If you are employed by someone, if you're employed by a company, a charity, whatever, you are under a duty. You're under legal obligation. You have a duty of care to your employer not to do anything to embarrass them. So the challenge. So if you're thinking, I want to challenge the state, I want to challenge the policy, I want to challenge another company, because you are an employee of that organization, if that would embarrass them, then legally you can't do it. Okay, so you're constrained. And then in turn, that's external challenge. Internal challenge, we've all heard stories, heard about it. Oh, I can't do that. HR won't let me. I've been accused of bullying in the workplace, and there's a policy that won't let me. So we don't encourage challenge, Matthew, do we? We have these internal and external legal structures and internal policies and processes that say, we don't encourage and enable people to bring challenge constructively. We don't train people when they're inducted as part of the skills development, management, leadership to say, how do you bring a challenge? How do you challenge a team or a behavior in a way that is legal and ethical and doesn't leave the person feeling that they're a complete failure and have screwed their lives up? But it allows you to both move on.
I think it is really important to point out that not all challenge is bullying, but some of it definitely is. And how that plays out and how we do that and how we practice that, I think is a huge part of it. And obviously where we have power, we have authority, how we receive the challenges is a huge part of what we're modeling and the thing that we're creating. But I think for me, what comes up is really this is an exploratory thing, and it's actually something that you build over time. You build trust over time. I think actually, when I think about it, very few organizations really have a high degree of trust. There's a lot of transactionality, there's a lot of contracts, there's a lot of but there's actually very little trust, and that makes working in this uncertain space really hard, if not impossible, because then we can't take those leaps, we can't do the stuff, we have to do it all, and it almost becomes a chicken and an egg problem, which is solved, by the way, but I won't get into that too much.
I know that too, yeah.
But
you can look it up on Wikipedia, folks. Yeah, it's fine. Google
it. Or what we mean by a chicken and an egg problem, it's a deadlock. You need something before you get something. You need to know the answer before you can be certain about it and kind of make a contract about it. So you need the trust to bridge that gap. But it builds over time. And I think that starting with the small stuff, starting with the stuff that's low risk, where if it does all fall apart, okay, we can cope with that before something really big is at stake.
Yeah. And I think there's something, as you're saying that, in terms of the trust, because there is a thing called the trust index that you can look up. And actually, it's the global trust index, really fascinating, because it shows that for the first time ever, businesses are now the only global player who we as a global society trust to be both competent and ethical.
Wow.
We trust charities to be ethical but not competent, and we don't trust governments to be competent or ethical now. So I think there's something interesting there in terms of this conversation, and I'm conscious again of time. And like you say, with all these programs, they're exploratory. They give us a space to start to explore it. Hopefully for you, dear listener, they've helped contribute to some of your own thinking and the way that Matthew and I have been able to reflect on our own start positions and build them out. But there's something about the trust and the challenge that actually we're kind of almost starting at the point of saying, if we don't challenge people well, we damage the trust. I think there's something deeper than that, which is if we don't respond to the challenge, the trust goes. And that's that's why we, in terms of that global index, those players going down the scale are because they're being challenged and they're not responding to it. They're not acknowledging it. So there's something about challenge is good. The important thing is not, it may be the most important thing about the challenge isn't the fact that we bring it or how we resolve it or how we manage it. The fact is we acknowledge it and we engage with it. That's what builds the trust. That's what keeps the relationships vibrant and healthy over time.
Absolutely. I think so. One way, because this show often covers a really broad area and there's some quite abstract stuff. One way I like to bring it to something practical is to ask, is there anything as a result of this assumption, the fact that we've challenged this assumption and that we don't, if this assumption isn't true or isn't universally true, is there anything that people don't have to do anymore or don't have to worry about that they might have worried about before or might not have been doing before?
Maybe there's something about the fear factor, and that's quite hard to stop being afraid of stuff. That we don't bring challenge because we're afraid we'll damage the relationship. And we've kind of skirted around a lot of stuff in this last hour or so, haven't we? And I'm not sure. I mean, it'd be interesting in terms of if people can comment or reach out to us afterwards when you've heard it and slept on it, to help us also pull out some additional stuff. But it strikes me saying, actually, challenge isn't something that you should be afraid of. There are lots of ways you can approach it. There are lots of benefits to doing it. The risks associated with it are actually pretty negligible or minimal when it comes to it. So what's stopping us from doing it? And it's probably fear. The fear, like you mentioned earlier, Matthew, what if I get this wrong? What if I upset the person? Well, you upset them. When we were kids, we would play all the time. It would get broken, we'd fix it. Again, one of the Margaret Barry's thing, she talked about Lego, as a way to play together. When we were kids, we'd play together all the time. We'd upset each other, we'd make up, we'd get on. As we're adults, we're suddenly thinking we can't do that anymore. Why the heck not? Play together, use those same techniques we had as kids. If we upset each other, say, oh, I'm really sorry, didn't mean to do that. Can we be friends again, please? I'll bring some cake. You can borrow my bike. Do it that way and just make it, human. Take out all this kind of paraphernalia of we have to be professional, have the, like you said, this strange language in closed session and stuff. Just treat it like we were kids again. And actually, that's probably a better way of doing it. Ditch pretending to be an adult, because frankly, being an adult sucks most of the time.
Yeah.
Let's get back to playing with Lego more and borrowing each other's bicycles to run around the wreck on.
Absolutely. So yeah, not worrying about being seen as professional, being seen as knowing everything, being seen as having all the answers, and actually being open and playful with this stuff, because it's possible to do serious stuff and have fun at the same time, and enjoy it. And I think that is truly radical. If more of us can do that, we can really do some really interesting stuff. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're watching this and you've enjoyed this conversation and you want to carry on the conversation with me, you can always get in touch in the normal ways, comment on all of the stuff. If, however, you specifically want to get in touch with Adrian, how would you like people to get in touch with you?
Telepathy, as always thought, is an underrated route. I'd love to practice that more with people. If you want to try and Professor Exit with me. I think, again, I'm quite messy. Stick my name into Google or whichever your preferred social media channel is, apart from Tinder, Grindr, WhatsApp, maybe TikTok. I've not decided about TikTok yet.
I don't get TikTok.
And I just say, just reach out. I always say to people, I'm happy to accept LinkedIn connection requests. To put a note on it, though, so I know where you're coming from. And I'm always happy as well to say to people, if you just want to have a conversation, if you think he sounds like somebody it might be interesting to pick the brains of about a particular thing that we're thinking about, or maybe he knows someone about something like this. I always say to people, I'm always happy to have a conversation without expectation, obligation, charge, commitment, any of the other usual legal disclaimers, because I know from my own professional past, I've benefited massively from the kindness of strangers offering me a bit of time for a conversation. And I figure it's just the way that we can help keep the universe running forward. Similarly, I've benefited a lot from listening to other people's interviews and series on other video sessions and programs, which is why when Matthew kind of said, do you want to be part of this? I thought, blimey, I didn't think I was that good. But, my mum always said, if someone asks nicely, you try and say yes. So, Matthew, if you ever meet my mum, you owe her a glass of white wine spritzers, I think. Then, but yeah, just, whatever it is, if I don't know, I probably know someone who might be able to help you out. So let's just try and keep trying to help each other out. That makes sense. I think I lost the grammar towards the end.
That's fine. That's all good. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed the conversation and very actually quite, hopefully felt quite practical, quite grounded, and actually sometimes it gets quite abstract or quite kind of energetic, and we go in all sorts of different directions. And this one I think was really interesting, and yeah, for me it has raised some questions, but I think it's actually raised some challenges about stuff I want to change and do differently in future, which is slightly different from questions. So there's something really good to play with. So yeah, thank you so much for appearing, Adrian. I really enjoyed having you on. I hope this show has got you thinking, and everything has, it's actually kind of got you asking questions and maybe challenging yourself a bit. It's your support that makes this possible, as the audience. So do share it, comment, reach out to us, have a conversation. It's all about engaging and playing with these ideas. The next episode, I'm going to be talking to Sally Ann Airy.
Not Sally Ann.
Exactly.
Wow.
And we're going to be talking about the assumption that I should listen to feedback, which is very closely related to this one in really interesting ways. It's almost the opposite side of this, I think, and how we listen to feedback and what that means, and that it's, whether we just take stuff in or whether it's an active process, and all sorts of really exciting things to get into with that. And that will be actually exactly the same time next week for once, which is 1 p.m. UK time on Thursday, the 4th of March. So yeah, thank you very much for being on the show, Adrian. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. And please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own.
Or polite anarchy, as you said.
And polite anarchy, yeah. That's the name of your podcast. Yeah. Cheers.